And good morning, Columbus. This is the Dave Fox Home Remodeling Show. I'm Gary Demas, and really pleased to be here this morning with Jamie Broslavsky. Jamie, we're going to be talking today about building permits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy Sunday.
So have you and Oscar been building anything lately that you needed to get a permit for?
No, I don't think, I'm trying to think if we've ever gotten a permit on our home.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
You haven't done any major
just
structural
cosmetic stuff.
Right. So today, if any of our listeners have questions about building permits, maybe you got a project in mind, room addition, of course. Yeah, I think everybody would realize they need a building permit for that. But what if you're doing what you would consider minor work in the kitchen or laundry room or basement? Maybe you want to finish off an area of the basement. Maybe you want to do a little wiring, a little plumbing. You might have questions about how far you can go on your own and when you would need a building permit. With the understanding, Jamie, that all the municipalities, okay, and cities have varied ideas on some of this stuff. So
Which makes it extra fun.
It makes it extra fun and also creates a little more legwork to make sure that you're following all the guidelines of your particular municipality.
Yes.
So that's a lot of things we'll be talking about today. We're really glad to have everybody listening, and we really want to bring you content that you're interested in. If you have any interest in remodeling, which I think everybody in the world does at some point or another.
Yeah.
And certainly in the city of Columbus, where housing values have been appreciating so much. I just read an article, Jamie, a couple weeks ago, that Columbus is one of the top-ranked cities in the nation in terms of housing values and the increase.
Wow.
And it's been an average for the last handful of years, about 16.9% per year, which is a pretty good return.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know. I actually have two different sets of friends, from one in Chicago and one in New York, who have been deemed to be virtual for such an extended amount of time that they've decided to move to Columbus.
Really?
Because they're getting their same New York salary and their same Chicago salary, no matter where they live.
Yep.
And went to college here and have friends here, and things in New York are still so shut down and everything. It's just, and same with Chicago. They just said it's not the same city. There's no reason to be paying such high premium to live there. So,
I wonder if the cost of living will decrease a little bit in those cities, or the cost of real estate, because people are moving out. Maybe, maybe not.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Time will tell.
Yeah. I'd have to imagine for New York, like the Hamptons has probably gone up. Anyone thinking about ever having that second home in the Hamptons probably now is like, yes, square footage out of the city. But interesting how such a virus can change just every dynamic of everything.
Across the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so building permits, the virus hasn't changed much so far.
No, they're a little slower though.
Yeah. But actually, they could implement some changes based on the virus.
Yeah.
Who knows?
For sure.
I'm sure somebody's working on it right at this very minute.
Those filtration.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
Yep, air filters, anything that's sanitary related, cleansing materials, all that kind of stuff. It's gotten a big push from this.
Yeah, I know those. It's funny because never before had you heard much of HEPA air filters. We use them on projects, but they were not something that you heard of on a daily basis or outside of our industry. And now it's kind of like a well-known thing as a HEPA air filter.
Yeah.
But.
Yep. Okay, well, let's dive into building permits.
Okay.
So we have a general blanketing code, building code, right, for the state.
Yes.
Right now we're using the 2019 Residential Code of Ohio. And with that code, obviously building permits, plans are reviewed to make sure that they meet the code. And meeting the code means you meet the minimum requirements of the code, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if the code says on your drywall you've got to have, I shouldn't be throwing this out because I don't know offhand what it is, but about every 8 inches, but you can like double up. So you'll need, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 screws or nails across a 4-foot span of a 2x4 or 2x6 wall stud. So you've got to meet the code by having at least that many fasteners in that space.
Yeah.
You can put more in, but you can't put less in. So they've got the minimum requirements.
Do you feel like that minimum is usually a bare minimum, or do you feel like their minimums are pretty adequate in some areas?
I think there's a range there. In terms of fastening drywall to the wall, a lot of times the drywallers will glue it too. So really, that's plenty of fasteners.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the thickness of materials is a little questionable in my mind. For instance, I remember going up on a brand new home, newly constructed home. Obviously, we didn't build it because we don't build new homes. And it was a truss rafter system, trusses that are 2 feet apart. And there was 3/8 plywood sheeting on there, and it was very spongy. And I was thinking, my gosh, this is definitely the bare minimum,
Yeah.
If you have much more than a squirrel walking across that roof, it's going to flex quite a bit.
Oh my.
So there are some areas where we definitely go beyond the minimums in what we do.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the interpretation. Well, not just the interpretation, but the, strictness of the inspector. Are they actually counting the fasteners, or some might actually count the fastener? You never know kind of who's going to walk in that door to take a look at it. Yeah.
And, meeting code requirements is one thing, but just like anything, there's vague areas and gray areas. So you can't, if the code book handled every specific situation out in the field with building, it would be volumes and volumes. And nobody would even read it. Just like the bills they pass in Congress.
Right?
Nobody reads it. So it's the building code, I think, is general. I think it's about as exhaustive as it should be. Without being too long. There's a lot in there, but there's a lot having to do with remodeling and building. So it's important to have a lot of that data in there. So the inspectors do have gray areas that they kind of make a judgment call on. And sometimes I think I could say that we always build stuff that we feel is right. And maybe whether it's wiring or the way we frame something or whatever, we're going to do it, and in our minds and with our experience, we know it's going to serve the client well for many, many years. But there's times where a building inspector disagrees with what we did. So they'll red flag it. We go in there and we change it to suit the building inspector's, criteria. And that's pretty much all there is to it.
Yeah.
So it's good for homeowners to be aware of that, because if something is flagged, maybe it's electrical, plumbing, structural, it doesn't mean there's this big boo-boo. In 99 cases out of 100, it means it's a judgment call, and their idea is a little different than what we did. And in my opinion, what we did is good.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to change my mind about that. But we understand we're dealing with different people. They have different ideas. They're not going to make a bad call and tell you to do something that's going to be a problem. So we just change it and go from there.
Yeah. Just might feel unnecessary.
Yeah. But it's part of, it's just all part and parcel to what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes too, certain codes, a general consumer such as myself doesn't really understand them and just finds them inconvenient. I remember when we built our house, I don't know if it's still a code or not, but you couldn't have a hose spigot in your garage. And it's such a pain to wash our cars without the hose spigot in the garage. So to me, I don't understand the purpose of that. And I feel like we should have been able to do that. But
after all, it's your house, you're building it, it's your money that's paying for it, and you want it done the way you want it done.
And I want to wash my car.
I understand that completely. And lucky me, I do have hot water and cold water in my garage. So
you lucky duck.
Somehow that passed 30 years ago. No problem.
There you go.
Okay, well, we're going to get into more building codes right after the break. Okay, Jamie, today we're talking about residential building codes. And the first segment, if you missed it, we were just kind of covering some of the basics and how there is an Ohio residential building code. The 2019 book is the current one. And we have some of those code books in our office. Our drafts people refer to those. And we really have to prepare in our office permit-ready drawings for the projects that we do.
And many different municipalities.
Yes, right. So each of them has their own little take on certain things. So it just requires a lot of know-how and referencing and then submitting plans. And, I'm thinking about submitting plans in general. Years ago, Jamie, we could just walk into the city of Columbus with a set of plans and get them approved right there at the counter. Mm-hmm. Those days are long gone.
Yeah.
And things have varied over the years. Of course, we had to take all the plans in before, but now, thank goodness, there's digital submittal of drawings.
Yeah.
So we can scan them and send them digitally, and that definitely saves a lot of trips to Delaware or Columbus or Dublin or New Albany, wherever.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I know. I worked for a home builder previously to working for Dave Fox and would submit the permits. And even then I was able to just drive them to the building departments, and sometimes they would just stamp them and hand them right back to me. And it was a little easier for a home builder because they were doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, it's different every time. So it's all that custom. But it was, it's amazing how much has changed even in the last 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so when we talk about what requires a permit and what doesn't require a permit, most of our projects do require them, but not all of them. So one of the kind of a general rule of thumb guidelines is how much of the existing wall you're exposing. So let's say you're doing a shower wall for a tub shower. Mm-hmm. So you've got about a 5x6 area for the back wall and about a 3x6 for the two end walls. So that's more than one sheet of drywall, because 32 square feet is how much you're allowed to open up before you need to get a building code. So that's one sheet of drywall.
Okay.
So once you strip off, if a listener at home is thinking about redoing their tub shower walls, then technically you would need to get a building permit when you strip all that down to the walls. And in that situation, you might argue, why on earth would I need a permit for that? I mean, I'm not cutting holes in anything. I'm not adding any wiring. I'm not changing plumbing. And technically, you're right. I mean, you wouldn't really need a permit for that. And honestly, I don't know I'm sure there's some municipalities, if you explain to them exactly what you were doing and there's no electric and there's no plumbing, they probably would say, just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But we all have to have guidelines, and the building department needs that too. So the 32 feet is really there for when walls are opened up, then you can see what's behind there. You can see the condition of the framing, any wiring or plumbing that is exposed, HVAC. If there's any issues or problems there, if any of that gets changed, then a department official needs to take a look at that and just make sure it's safe.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because all these guidelines and the permits and the building code are all there really for our own protection, our home's protection. But no one wants to get a permit. Yeah. It's this funny thing. It's like going to the doctor, but something might be wrong, but let's just not look at it and pretend it's not there. But
you want your neighbors to get a permit,
sure?
Right?
Yes.
Or anybody else.
Anyone else should definitely get a permit.
I don't need one.
But I don't need a permit.
I know what I'm doing here. Yep, that is human nature.
Well, and I think permits get a bad rap. They're costly. They're frustrating. They're going to add time, and so it's hard.
You submit yourself to someone else's authority, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and no one likes to do that.
Right.
So they're a funny thing in that they're really there to protect you, but you don't want them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we as building contractors, licensed contractors in the city of Columbus, don't have a choice. We get our jobs permitted. We have great relationships with all the different municipalities and their inspectors, and usually we have no issues whatsoever with them.
Yeah.
Knock on something here.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that question of, do I need a permit? Do I not need a permit? Is, common sense comes over a little bit of am I doing anything that someone would need to check? Things like that, and changing out a plumbing faucet, changing out a light. etc., or anything strictly cosmetic, paint, anything like that doesn't. But you're right. Once you start opening up a wall, it gets a little dicey sometimes, and you know, it never hurts to have someone come look. If an inspector is going to come out, you know, you better be safe than sorry.
Yes, sure. Now we have a few situations where someone is just doing a change out, you know, just to pull and replace. We're not really doing wall work to speak of. We're just changing a sink vanity or a toilet or a fixture, not relocating any plumbing. We really usually don't need a permit in those situations, but it's pretty rare that that's all that we do in a project, because usually when people are going to that level of changing out things, they may want to get a little more involved or move something slightly or do a little change.
I think too, where it can get a little bit more questionable are things that are similar but a change. For example, in let's say a master bathroom. A lot of master bathrooms have that giant whirlpool tub and even those cinder block windows, you know, for privacy. If you wanted to change that window, for example, let's say you wanted to take out the cinder block window and
That'd
put
be a glass block window.
Or a glass, or whatever.
I don't think you'd see much through a cinder block window.
You don't want a cinder block window? A glass block window. Would you need a permit for that? Because it's changing the exterior, kind of.
Yeah, and windows, it hasn't always been this way, but in the last few years, you need a permit even to change windows.
Yeah.
So that's something fairly new.
So even though that seems like a cosmetic change, because it does somewhat change the outside, you still want to get a permit.
Yeah, there's a lot of things involved with windows. One is energy efficiency, but also if it happens to be an egress window where you've got to make sure that someone can get out or a fireman can get in to save someone.
Yeah.
So those are critical, and you know the city's got definitely an argument for wanting to know what's happening in those situations.
Yeah, certainly. And that's also typically then you would want to talk to your HOA or zoning potentially too with changing. Would it be just changing a window or adding a window?
Okay, now
is that a whole nother can of worms?
That can get real sticky in historic areas, right?
Yes.
German Village, the Victorian Village, certain areas where history is really important.
Yeah.
Then windows are going to be one pain, literally.
All right.
No pun intended. Yeah. There are manufacturers, Marvin is one, that make more historically authentic windows, all wood.
Okay.
That will work in those situations.
Okay. So even in a residential area that's newer, like Powell, Dublin, let's say, would you want to contact your HOA and zoning if you're just changing out a window, or in those areas you're typically okay?
Well, you would be getting a permit to do that, so that's automatically going to contact everybody that has a pony in that show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So not as simple as a little window swap.
Right.
No. All right. Very good. So what goes first, HOA or zoning or building department?
They both work hand in hand, but the HOA's got to approve it before zoning will give their final approval.
Okay.
So if you go to zoning first and skip the HOA, zoning is going to say, oops, wait a minute, you have to go to the HOA and work through this with them, and then they'll notify us, and then we can do our job.
Okay.
Yep.
And if it's something that needs a variance, it might need it for all three, or is it kind of a one variance works for all?
Yeah, the variance would work for all. So
Okay.
the variance is going to be up to the zoning department.
Okay.
So that could be maybe you're a little too close to the side lot line or the frontage, or you have so many square feet covering the lot now and you're kind of going over the maximum. There's a lot of different reasons for a variance. We'll take a break and we'll talk about more of that in just a minute. So today we are talking about building permits, right, Jamie?
Yes.
And obviously we get into some code issues with that because we have to submit permit drawings that meet the code requirements. So let's say what were we talking about right before the break? Variances, yeah. So the variances come into play a fair amount of the time when people are adding on to a home.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different criteria that go into play for a variance. Some of them are pretty easy to get through. Some of them can be very challenging. We've had some that just would not accept it.
Yeah.
That's usually going to be in a place like German Village, Victorian Village, where they have very strict guidelines. So the variance, often what we'll do when we get a project and we're first going to check with zoning. If we're adding on to a space, we're going to, Brenda, who is in our permit department, she knows all the different municipalities and the people there, and she's going to touch base with them and say, hey, here's what we're looking at doing. Just give me an idea of what we're up against here. Will this pass zoning, or what do you have to say about it? So they'll tell her, yeah, that should pass fine, no problem. And then we just go to work and start designing and planning and estimating. But they may say, oops, we got a problem with the side clearance here from the edge of your building to the side lot line. Mm-hmm. And that would require a variance. And Brenda may say, okay, can you give us an idea, of the likelihood of this passing? And of course, everyone's like, wow, wait a minute now. You can't hold me to anything. But we're going to try to get some kind of an idea.
Well, and who can say no to Brenda?
True, right. That's exactly right. So we want to be, as careful as we can in planning this to make sure we're not spending our time, fruitlessly, and also the client's time. Mm-hmm. So variances can get a little tricky, but we go to the meetings, we present everything, and typically we have a pretty good track record of getting those through if they make sense. But like I say, early on, if we decide this is really risky, it's up to the client. If they say, you know what, I'm going to pay some money to have this design, and if it doesn't pass, I understand that's a possibility. I'm willing to take that chance. Sometimes we have clients that will do that.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the benefits of maybe not being a do-it-yourselfer and working with a professional that's working with these municipalities all the time is we do have those relationships already developed, and can kind of talk through some of that conversation and get those answers. Mm-hmm. But I think any consumer, the building departments and the people that are working in them are so helpful. They want to help.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you have a do-it-yourself project, I think you can call or even just stop in there, and they're more than happy to help answer your questions or tell you if you need a permit or don't, or some issues that you might run into. Mm-hmm. So that's always a really good, I think, first step.
Sure.
If you're trying to do it yourself.
Right. And in terms of doing it yourself, okay, Jamie, do you think you could get a building permit, you and Oscar, to build a room addition on your house? Do you think you would want to build a room addition on your house, you and Oscar?
I definitely would not do that. The only way I would do that is because of where I work, and I might know a few people.
Okay.
But outside of that connection there, I would not personally feel comfortable adding on to my home. I don't feel like I'd be able to do it.
Technically, you could get your own building permit.
That's really terrifying.
Being the homeowner. Mm-hmm. And I imagine the inspector is going to be a little more, thorough in investigating your room addition.
I would hope so. Okay. I would hope so.
But it is nice that, a lot of homeowners are very talented and very handy and can do a lot on their own. I've seen some amazing projects that homeowners have done, including me. I'm a do-it-yourselfer too.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's plenty of people out there that grew up building things. I mean, I think if you talk to any of the people in our field or even in our office, most people have some sort of construction background growing up. And it's kind of in our blood, in our DNA. Even my dad was an electrical contractor. Yeah. I do the marketing for a construction firm, but it's still there. I think almost everybody that we work with has kind of that background, and there's plenty of people that have that background too that don't work in this industry. So there's definitely talented people out there that could do it. I'm not one of those, but all the power to someone that is.
Yep. Okay, so where should we head now with these building permits?
All right. Well, let's talk about the submittal process, because that is a process. There's a lot to it. So first, now you've determined that you do need a permit. What would you say are some of the most important things when submitting for a permit? Okay,
submitting it. As far as the way we look at it, Jamie, we have a big production team, right? We got to great carpenters, project managers. We want to keep those guys busy. So when we are submitting for a permit, there's a time frame set into motion.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're working with the client, working through the design drawings and plans, that's one period of time. And once we get to the point where the client approves our designs and our budget, then we're ready to package that up and submit it to the building department. So timing is important here. Like we mentioned years ago, you could walk up to the counter and get a permit. Well, those days are gone, and that doesn't happen anymore. So we've got to submit drawings and specifications, and then we wait, and they're reviewed. And different departments take different amounts of time, or different cities, different municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them farm out the review to a third-party company, and usually the time frame's longer there. But many of the cities and municipalities have their own reviewers,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a little more efficient, I think. So when we submit those drawings, we don't want to be going back and forth, submit drawings, and then they say, well, I'm sorry, this doesn't meet code, blah, blah, blah. They send it back to us, red marked. We change it, send it back. That just eats up time, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So we want to be as accurate and thorough as we can when we create these drawings and make sure that we've got the specs right, we've got the plans right, especially if there's anything structural. So there are minor structural details that we can actually handle in-house, where someone reviewing the plans can easily look at tables and say, let's say we've got a patio door that's 6 feet wide on the back of a home,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to put a 9-foot wide door, a 3-section door in there. So we've got a header then that's got to span about 10 feet instead of 6.5 feet.
Okay.
So it's a single or 2-story home. It's easy to get load-bearing tables and evaluate that and come up with something that's going to work. So that's a pretty easy structural detail, but we can get into some really complicated ones where we may be removing an internal wall that is supporting a second floor and also a roof load. So there's multiple different structural elements to this. And in those cases, we're not going to do it on our own, and the reviewer is not going to review it on their own. They're going to need an engineer stamp on that.
Okay.
So we work with an engineering firm. We send those drawings. They send an engineer out to do a field review of the project. And he or she's going to come up with drawings, engineered drawings for that structural detail, and we're going to include those with our permit. So that's going to pass, because if you have an engineer or architect stamp, they're taking the responsibility for the load calcs, and a city is going to approve that.
Wow. So how would you go about finding an engineer if you were a general consumer?
Well, in these days, you can't let your fingers do the walking in the yellow pages anymore. So you
Yeah.
go online and Google, and
Good old-fashioned
there's
Google.
a lot of engineering. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you would just look for a structural engineer, residential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We get the question a lot about why we don't do commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a completely different process, correct, with the building permits?
It's a whole different process in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And we are, we're not a commercial firm. We're not set up for that. We're set up for residential. We love it. We don't build new homes. We remodel because that's what we're good at.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break. And we are talking residential building codes. And, well, actually, next week we're going to get into the code issues, aren't we, Jamie?
Yes. This week we're really focusing on the permitting process.
Permitting, right. So you got to get the permit first, and then you build your project, and then it gets inspected, and then the inspector makes sure that you met all the codes that we're going to talk about next week.
That's right.
Yep.
There you have it.
Okay.
Okay, so we just submitted our permits. We got
Okay.
our engineer stamp.
Mm-hmm.
We got our HOA approval, our variances, everything we need. We filled out the paperwork, got our plans back. They're approved.
Oh, that's great news.
Isn't that exciting?
Mm-hmm. So now
here we go. Now it's smooth sailing, right?
This is the start. This is part of the mobilization of a project.
Okay.
So when we sell a contract and have an agreement with a homeowner to build a room addition or remodel their kitchen, we're going to accept a deposit on that, because now all the mobilization goes into effect. That's getting the permits, going through the HOA, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So like you say, once we get the approved permits, then our construction supervisor, Greg, can give that job a start date. Well, actually, he doesn't give it a start date at that moment because we have to make sure that all the final selections are made. Any
That's right.
selections that could influence the start date, like if a client didn't have all their cabinets determined yet, and there's a 12-week lead time to get cabinets, we've got to make sure that they get those selections done before we give a firm start date. So we'll have a list of any items that would be like that could extend the start date. But if once the client meets those selections and gets that done, then we would establish a firm start date. But we have our permits. We know that's not going to be an issue.
Yeah.
So without permits, it's all speculative. And of course, every client that's working with us wants some kind of an idea when we're going to start.
Yeah.
Hardly anyone says, "Oh, I don't care. You could start anytime," right?
Just whatever
Has
you
that
want.
ever happened?
Whatever works best for you.
Yeah, right. Okay. And in that situation, we want to give them some kind of an idea. And once we get the permits, we have a more firm idea. So that's how that works.
So for the whole process of the permitting, from the time that we start working on the drawings to put everything on them that municipality requires and everything like that, till we get the permit back, what kind of time frame would you say that is on average?
Yeah, well, that'll vary some with the complexity of the project. But let's say it's an extensive kitchen remodel. Maybe we're tearing out the wall between the dining room and kitchen. We're tearing the soffits out, doing all new lighting and stuff. And it also depends on the particular city or municipality because they all have varying times. But in a wonderful situation, it would be a week or week and a half. In a not so wonderful situation, it would be 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that just time at the building, like
Yes.
with it at the
That's
building?
once they're
department?
submitted, then and that's why I was saying
2 to 4
in an
weeks or
earlier
so.
segment, we want to have all our ducks in a row because let's say we wait 4 weeks and get a set of drawings back that's red marked. Now we have to change it and submit it again. Now we're not
Yeah.
going to have to wait another 4 weeks, but we might wait 1 more week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Okay. And then on a project like the example you gave, how long would that take our drafts people to kind of get all of our ducks in a row before we even submit it?
Mm-hmm. The drafting process is kind of multifaceted. It starts when we measure a project. So we've got a drafting team that does the as-built drawings and puts them in the computer because once the plan is all in the computer, then our designers would take over and create the new space.
Yeah.
So the design consultant is going to work on that. And so he'll create the new kitchen plan, shows it to the client. They approve it. They approve the budget. Now it's ready to apply for permits. Well, it's ready to go to the permit department. So it goes to our permitting drafts people.
Yes.
And they are going to take the drawings that are pretty close. All the dimensions should be right. And they're going to just add the final details that the building department wants to see. Structural
Okay.
issues, notes, if there are structural changes happening there and we need engineered drawings, they're going to have those. So they're just going to take that package that's already pretty close and just fine tune it, make sure it's going to meet department standards, and they'll submit it. So that doesn't really take very long.
Okay.
Now, if it's a really extensive multi-room addition, then, just the length of the size of the project is going to affect the length of that whole process.
Okay. And now that the project's underway, we get to the fun part, inspections.
Yeah.
Those can be a little challenging.
Could be. Usually the only challenge is just waiting on the inspector to get there. So yeah, we have a series of inspections. Initially, if we're doing a room addition, we're going to have a foundation. So we're going to dig and have a inspection when we dig for the footers. So they're going to verify that we've got the proper depth so that we won't have any freeze-thaw issues.
Okay.
Then there'll be a framing inspection. So or framing. This could be just interior or a room addition. We're going to get all the framing done and have an inspection then. Then we're going to get all the wiring and mechanicals done. Wiring, HVAC, plumbing, and we're going to have rough-in inspections for those mechanicals. And then once that's done, then they're going to insulate, and we'll have an insulation inspection.
Oh, my.
And then we can start all the finish work, get the drywall on, put the flooring in, get to the point where we're ready for final inspections. So at that point, the job is pretty much done.
Yeah. Now, during these inspection times, I know I hear this all the time, that can be when clients can start to get a little, I don't know, impatient.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like nothing's being done because we're just waiting for the inspections.
Yeah.
And those are a hard thing to time out too, because you can't plan ahead an inspector to come on a certain day, can you?
Not typically. I mean,
Yeah.
they have, I think, a 2-day window or something.
Okay.
2 or 3 days.
So
at
do
the
we
most.
typically wait until that part is done before we call for an inspection? Would you say?
Almost. I mean,
Yeah.
we sure don't want to call an inspector out there and find out that, oh my gosh, we're missing this part and couldn't finish it or who knows what.
Right.
So we want to be absolutely sure we're going to be ready for the inspector. And when we're at that point, even if there's a little more work to do, we'll call for that inspection. So when you have the rough-in inspections, then it's not just one, it's multiple inspections, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we try to get that process done as quickly as possible, but it is kind of a stall in the project, and there's a little time involved there. Seems like the two areas of a project like that get the homeowners a little antsy is the drywall stage, where the drywall goes on really quick, and that's super exciting.
Yeah.
And then the finishers come in and they put one coat on and leave for the day. Come back the next day, put another coat on, leave for the day. Come back the next day. So there's like 5 days where it seems like not much is happening and they're not in the house that long.
And it's messy.
And it's messy. And then there's nothing else happening. So that's a little tough to get through.
Yeah.
But then once the drywall's sanded and finished and sanded, then we can move forward from
Then
there.
you can keep moving. Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Alright.
try to prepare homeowners for that. Managing expectations is really important.
Yeah. Definitely. All right. Well, I feel like I could go get a permit.
Okay.
I just need a project.
Yep. All right. Well, we can fix you up with that.
All right.
So I hope everyone has enjoyed our talk about permitting today. We want you to know that if you have any questions, anything that we didn't cover, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@davefox.com. So that's info@davefox.com. We'd love to hear comments, suggestions, questions. We'll definitely get back to you and answer those. We like hearing from our listeners. And if anyone wants to listen to any previously broadcast shows, Jamie, they can go to davefoxradio.com, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Or you can search for us on any podcast platform.
Okay.
Dave Fox Home Remodeling Show.
So this is Gary and Jamie signing off. We'll see you next week.
Bye.